Good morning. Now is the time to recall your dreams. Drinking coffee, sweetened with buttery syrup. It's a necessity. It's actually pretty good. I dreamed I was in Houston. I have some sort of erector set, but it's nuclear weapons and a possible apocalypse. It's got little ICBM missiles, a yellow tank of the nuclear stuff, probably the yellow cake, uranium. It's probably rarefied, weaponized. I'm trying to get a peace deal, and then I'm supposed to go out with my ex girlfriend. I keep going back and forth from here to there. It's a very strange dream. And then um, it's weird. I don't know how the miniature nuclear weapon set had to. I don't know why it seemed to be as big of a deal as it did in the dream. It did. It seemed like getting it finished would stop the possibility of nuclear war, which is dream logic. It doesn't make any sense. But the me and this girl, and I see her a lot in my dreams. Like we're friends, but like she wanted to go out on a date, and she wanted to get laid because she was no longer afraid to do it. She was kind of a freak back in the days who was afraid to for pregnancy reasons, which I guess is okay. You don't want to get knocked up at a time. But on the date, she wanted to. But none of that ever happened. It was just weird commentary. I got my toilet here fixed. It was put in another spot where there is no spot for it to go. And suddenly, I mean, it worked like a normal toilet. And that was all I dreamed. I'll finish this video in a little bit when I have more.
Running. Lots of material, lots of things to catch up on.
Coffee and syrup.
Anomalous America series is going to get back up and running on Tuesday. I've been throwing around the idea of live streaming that series at a different time of day, and I've been playing around with that. So it may still be an early morning show, but if it is, it'll be the last week of that, and going forward, it'll probably be a mid to late afternoon Pacific Standard Time show. Getting back to pumping that out once a week.
He didn't.
Really been putting in a lot of hours lining up the next few states. And for those who haven't seen it or don't remember, Indiana is our next state. So looking forward to getting that back up and running. In this episode today, it's going to be kind of a continuation of my Yucatan, Mexico, Atlantis, whatever kind of terminology, pre-flood, pre-reset, or pre-multiples, as we're going to talk about here in this episode, and what that means. And as you can see by the thumbnail, the Chinese, the ancient first settlers of America. Now, it goes without saying, as I've stated before, but I will repeat myself, that, when it comes to reading newspaper articles, there's often a lot of things I don't necessarily, agree with or share the same perspective as the author. And there seems to be a lot of people who still
don't get it.
Think that I'm kind of picking and choosing, which I am in a way, but I'm also just presenting things that are interesting, whether or not I agree with them. So, kind of a misnomer going into this, that perspectives change in all dresses as I read the article, but just to be, open to the material and see what people were finding, for a lot of the information that comes to this kind of like Tataria or whatever you want to call it, post cataclysmic age, so to say, antediluvian, post-diluvian. Something I've been pointing out throughout, probably one of the most popular themes throughout my video series has been that, we were literally standing on top of buried races, buried civilizations, and in some cases 1, 2, 3, 4 or more. And going through the Anomalous America series, I think that's kind of probably my number one theme, that there's been a kind of clockwork movement to these ages of man, and that the slate is wiped clean, so to say. But yeah, so anyways, enough rambling. It's good to be back. I'm looking forward to reading your comments, and I'm going to try and do 3 or 4 videos a week, and I'll be kicking off some new material themes in January, and we'll talk about that around the end of the year. But I'm really looking forward to that. I'm going to be starting a Substack where I kind of portray more of my honest opinion about the nature of things in this realm we inhabit, and bringing in all these different materials, not just reading a specific article for what it is and allowing you all to come to your own conclusions. I'll be kind of putting my own stamp, so to say, on the things as I see them, and there'll be a little video series included in that.
One of these stories was one of the greatest stories I've ever fucking heard in my life. It was about a prospector that saved an Indian's life, and this Indian took him to an entrance in the Rocky Mountains, and it led down and into the interior of the mountain, where there was a flowing river underground under the base of the mountain. They got trapped. They made a boat, went in there. The Indian dies, but he finds this giant city with gold, and he couldn't get out. He had to make a message in a bottle sort of situation, because the river passed through like some lava vents that heated it up, and he couldn't go, but he made this thing that popped out onto the Colorado River, and then made it out, and was picked up by a boat. So that's where the tale comes from. Some account of some guy that got trapped in there and couldn't get out. It's fucking badass. And, is it true or not? Grain of salt.
But yeah, for some of you that don't know, I've been working on a book, and I put that on the back burner about 5 or 6 months ago, maybe a little longer than that. And I look forward to January getting into full swing. Going to be able to take quite a bit of time off work in the winter months, January, February, March. And I really look forward to setting some different things in motion. I'm working on a series called Archivist Adventures, where I'll actually be kind of going out and exploring some things, boots on the ground, so to say. And so I got a few plans for that. Really looking forward to starting that off. But yeah, that's just kind of a quick little update on where things are, how things are going with the channel as far as the direction and what I project for the future. And again, I hope you're excited for some new material, and I'm excited to be presenting it all to you again. So without further ado, let's get into the material today. Again, the Chinese, the ancient first settlers of America. Something we've already discussed, and I've stated quite openly. Again, this is kind of an ongoing series, and the main focus at this present time is that in the next 2 days, I'll be posting the next chapter. The next chapter of my Queen Mu, which is chapter 1, funny enough. And I look to be putting those together at a more rapid rate. So you'll have a playlist finished by the end of the year. That's my goal. And as many of you know, I fail at meeting a lot of my goals, but I'm going to do my best. So let's get into this here. This is from the Omaha Sunday Bee. It's amazing how many great articles come out of the Omaha Sunday Bee. It's quite amazing, actually. It's one of my favorites. From the 1890s to the 1919s or late teens, so many great articles with fantastic drawings, and this is no different. I've been saving this one, and I figured it was a perfect time to kick off the kind of back to presenting after a long hiatus. But yeah, so here we are. We're just going to read these captions on all these images, and then we'll get into the text. This one here says, at least 5,000 years ago, it would seem the Chinese sailing their junks across the Pacific discovered America. Now, as we get farther along in this series, I'll be kind of establishing the fact that I think that we came from here and went out. We, as in the human race. Whether expanding Earth theory contributes to this or however your kind of cosmogony opinions, and everyone's differ quite substantially. But again, the buried civilization on civilization on civilization, and we'll break down some of the languages and the overlays between the cultures that came from the Yucatan and not only spread into what we now call Asia today and India, but also the Mediterranean, Africa, Ireland, Britain, so on and so forth. And we'll tie this in with the kind of the religious lens, the Brahmins and the Druids and, Wotan and Odin and how this kind of all seems to go back to this antediluvian single type culture. I often use the word Atlantean, but that's more of a modern term, believe it or not. And yeah, pre-Ice Age culture, so to say, and kind of tying this in again with religious stories and showing how many of these religious, the Bible mostly, but the Book of Mormon, the Quran, many others, the Torah, how a lot of their historical narratives are becoming far more
the same,
making a lot more sense here as America being the setting for those stories. And we're going to take this and we're going to go into kind of the King David, the 12 tribes, the 10 lost tribes, quote unquote. Why authors were writing that the lost tribes went beyond the South Pole, which is very interesting, as well as the North Pole. There were authors saying that they went beyond the quote wall, and that if you went beyond the ice to the North Pole, there would be a tropical land inhabited by a dark-skinned race, similar to some of the stories I've shared with Beyond the Southern Realms. We'll tie this in with some of the subterranean narratives. Again, the kind of buried civilization stories. And
let's get on with it.
But yeah, I'm getting off course here.
You are.
I'll zoom in a little here. Settling, they built a city, and in a grave of one of their number, many years after, a clay image of him was buried. This great city fell into ruins, perhaps through conquest, perhaps through earthquake, but the image lay safe. The first city was covered with earth, and upon it arose, through centuries, another splendid and mysterious one. This too fell into ruins, and upon it arose a third metropolis of the mysterious race, and still the image lay safe. At last, the third city was a place of ruins, but still under the remains of the first, the Chinaman's image lay. And at last, Professor Nguyen, digging, recovers the image to answer perhaps the enigma of the new world's beginning. This one here says clay image of a Chinaman found by Professor Niven. This is the one they found. Now, originally in this area, when they were digging several wells before archaeologists were involved, they found all kinds of crazy stuff. And they couldn't believe how far outside the city they had to go, because they kept running into brick, stone, pavements, even as they called them, roadways, perhaps. In fact, in one story that I believe I've read in a previous video, they talked about going 100 miles outside of the city, and everywhere they dug, they found stone, masonry, and a kind of cement roadway, kind of like a flooring. 100 square miles even. That's pretty incredible. One of the oldest monuments in Mexico, probably the work of the early Chinese invaders. That's right here. And then this one here, all that is left of the ancient lost city of Tulum, which flourished 1,000 years before the Aztecs came and is now believed to have been built by Chinese. And then right here, Buddha-like image found at Oaxaca, which also proves a prehistoric association between China and Mexico. Now these images, again, as I've gone through Anomalous America, I've shown that many of these, the farther they dug, they found some very similar things, and much of New Mexico, Arizona had endless relationships to, quote, Chinese. Now we'll dive into more. What is the Chinese? Who are the Chinese, and how the idea of who a Chinese person was altered quite drastically in the 1800s, and why the Chinese and the Manchu were at war with one another. And we'll connect not only iconography, religious beliefs, astronomical data, but also clothing and hairstyles, and showed the quite drastic relation between what we would call, quote, a Tartar and a Native American and a Manchu of Manchuria. And how, I've shared a lot in the past about America was identified as not only China, but as Katai, also India Superior, and in several places, Ethiopia. And why that's important, especially from a biblical context. We'll talk a little bit about why Columbus said that he landed in China or quote Asia, when he landed in Cuba, and why he was venturing to Cathay. And did Marco Polo really venture through Asia, or did he land in Florida? We'll dive into all of those theories and more throughout this month and into further research. But yeah, so there's the captions for the images, and now we're going to get into the bulk of the text here. An image of an unmistakable Chinaman, molded in clay, has been found at San Miguel, Amantia, buried beneath the ruins of 3 Mexican civilizations. The discovery is believed by high archaeological authorities to prove the interesting theory that the ancient civilization of Mexico, preceding that of the Aztecs, was of Chinese or Mongolian origin. This explanation would unravel the mystery of the wonderful Mayan ruins of Yucatan and other parts of Mexico. The clay Chinaman, with oblique eye slits, padded coat, flowing trousers, and slippers, a Chinaman in everything except the queue, which is lacking. Again, this is that all-important hairstyle I was mentioning, and the correlations here between, the quote Native Americans and the Tartars, and many other correlations we'll make. The Chinese, it must be remembered, and let's zoom in for you guys, sorry. The Chinese, it must be remembered, did not adopt the queue until they had been conquered by the Tartar horde from the north. Now we're going to show how that's a bit erroneous. We're going to correlate the braided, curled hair, the braid, the long hair, the queue as it was called, the kingdom of the queue, how important this idea of the braided being called queue. And this will correlate so many things when we talk about braiding feathers into your hair. The sons of Eber, Hebrew, how a lot of the, quote, Native American cultures had undeniable Hebraic. That's kind of a misnomer, but the correlations are quite endless, and how this correlates to a period of time during and pre-1800s when, again, as we described here in the beginning of this video, that civilizations were wiped, and then new ones flourished, and then they were wiped, and then new ones flourished. And why we're all trying to rebuild our buried history and what happened in the past here in this realm. Again, 30 feet under the ground at San Miguel, Amantia, 19 miles from the city of Mexico, the image was uncovered in the ruins of a buried tomb by Professor William Niven of Mexico City. Now, remember what I was mentioning earlier, that in several cases that they were unable to dig wells, and that for 100 square miles in all directions, they kept running into buried buildings, masonry, stonework, pavements, quote, pavements, kind of a different terminology in this time period, but you get the idea. A floor of cement, so to say. It is about 7 inches in length, and where the arms are broken, the clay of which the image was made shows red and friable in the center. Outside, however, this clay has metamorphosed to stone, so that it can be chipped away with a hammer only with the greatest difficulty. It is about 3 1/2 inches in width across the chest, and 1 1/2 inches in thickness through the abdomen. And the ears are huge rings similar to those worn by the Chinese to this day. And on the head is a skull cap. Now remember the time frame. These earrings you do not see. I mean, you do in certain parts of China, but they've been completely wiped for the most part. And, most people, I would say today, in the 2000s, are familiar with them from a Mayan cosmology standpoint. And who are the Mayan? How can we relate this to not only the Olmec, but the idea of these, quote, Ethiopians? What is Katai? Where is Katai? Who is Prester John? Right? King David? These kind of biblical lineages. Then, again, tying in the pre- and post-Diluvian epochs into more of a narrative from America, which is quite interesting. We're going to zoom out, make sure I'm staying on point here. With a skull cap, with a tiny button in the center, almost exactly like the caps of the mandarins of the empire, which has so lately become a republic. Now, very important, okay? The mandarins and the Manchu and the Q, they're correlating a lot of really interesting things. that are going to become very important in later videos. The coat, which is loose and the type of which still worn by the Chinese, is shown fastened with a frog and a button, while on the breast is a circular plate or ornament, evidently once covered with a thin layer of beaten gold, but worn by contact with the earth for unknown centuries. Each arm is broken off close to the shoulder, and the opening of the entire tomb or room, nearly 30 feet square, in which the image was found, has failed to discover the missing hands. This Chinese image was not made by the Aztecs. It had been buried in the earth of the Valley of Mexico 1,000 years before the Aztecs set foot on the plateau. The Aztecs were newcomers in Mexico's history. The bloodthirsty conquerors of the great civilized, organized races of the day knew very little more until Professor Niven uncovered the Chinaman. Mr. Niven, who has been delving in the buried tombs and temples of Mexico for 30 years, declares that the first people of Mexico came from China by way of the Bering Straits. Ramon Mina, the foremost living archaeologist of Mexico, who has spent 20 years in the ruins of Mexico's dead races, supports him without qualification. There is an America's Egypt, who ravaged with fire and sword the cities built by the Toltecs, the Olmecs, and the Mayas. It is probably true that the Aztecs built little, if any, of the massive palaces and temples whose ruins mark all parts of Mexico. They took them by force of arms from the builders. When Hernan Cortez asked of Montezuma, his captive, who built that huge temple, Montezuma replied, Las Toltecas. And Bernal Diaz, historian of the conquest, named the tribe which had preceded the Aztecs in the Valley of Mexico the Toltecs. But in the Nahuatl tongue, which was the language of the Aztecs and which is still spoken in some of the villages of remote Mexico, Tolteca means a builder, a mason, nothing more. And Montezuma knew as little of the race which made the calendar stone, which worked out its own system of astronomy and time, and which moved 20-ton blocks of stone to build its temple, as did the Spanish invaders, an archaeologist of two other school of archaeology. Together school? Two other? My apologies. Two other school of archaeology, whose members insist that the Aborigines of Mexico came from the east by way of a land connection across the lower end of the Gulf of Mexico. Now, this is very interesting. I've made some long posts about this on Twitter many years back, that a lot of these kind of Toltecan, so to say, again, we've shown the correlations here with what they meant and how this correlates with the, quote, Masons, the Freemasons, right? Well, Freemasonry today, I would say, is a copy of ancient Masonry, and the correlation with the, quote, lost tribe found below ground in South America. Check out that video if you haven't seen it. But they found what the author deemed to be one of the lost tribes living below ground in an advanced cave system full of mahogany and amazing wood carvings and supporting quite a large amount of people. They were practicing what he called Masonic ritual. And again, correlating the kind of idea of the lost tribes. You know, there were authors in the 1800s saying the lost tribes went underground. There were other ones saying that they went south beyond the South Pole.
Very interesting. So clearly we don't know most of our own history. Most of the people that build these big temples, they're not the people that lived there at the time. The Egyptians didn't build the pyramid, not the current ones, or the last ones we know of with the hieroglyphics. Aztecs didn't build these. Incas didn't build theirs. They all moved into them. Fascinating.